Madeleine and Cameron, welcome both to Forza Monthly. It's really great to have you both on the show, and we're going to be discussing the journey of bringing ASL and BSL to Forza Horizon 5. So let's start by telling everyone a bit about your roles and how you worked to bring this important feature to the game. Starting with Madeleine.
Hi, Leah. Thanks for having us. I'm the producer for the sign language accessibility feature. So basically, I'm responsible for all of the logistics of getting the sign language recorded, getting it in the game, getting consultants' feedback on it, and bringing in subject matter experts like Cameron to come in and tell us what they think.
Thank you, Madeleine. And Cameron, how about yourself?
Hi, Leah. Thank you for having me. So my name's Cameron. By day, I'm a teacher, and I specialize as a teacher of the deaf. So I teach deaf and hard of hearing children and young people. I'm hard of hearing myself. My first language is English, but my second language and home language is British Sign Language. And when I'm not teaching, I work as an accessibility consultant, giving feedback on deaf and hard of hearing issues related to gaming. And it was back in 2019, I was invited to Playground Games as one of the subject matter experts who sort of came in, shared experiences of being a deaf, hard of hearing gamer. And it was sort of from there that this process kind of picked up, and the feedback that I gave led to the inclusion of ASL and BSL in the game, which is amazing.
Absolutely. Madeleine, could you tell me more about how accessibility became a design pillar for Forza Horizon 5?
Sure. So accessibility has always been really important for Forza Horizon. I think we won accessibility awards for both Forza Horizon 4 and 5. And obviously, we're very proud of that, but we also see it as a responsibility to continue to push forward accessibility, to continue making the game as inclusive to as many players as possible. And so when we were starting development for Forza Horizon 5, we made accessibility one of our core pillars. This means it got the same level of attention as any of our other core features like expeditions or event lab. And that meant we started thinking about accessibility very early. And as we were developing the game, from the start, we were always thinking, how are we making this inclusive? How is this going to be accessible from the bottom up? And to kind of get us going there, we started with the Xbox accessibility guidelines. Those gave us a baseline for understanding what are the different barriers players with different disabilities have. How does that affect their ability to play the game? And with that understanding, we were then able to go and actually talk to people within this disabled community and get their feedback on how different features were or weren't accessible and how we could do better.
And it's great that the community has been directly involved in implementing Forza Horizon 5's accessibility features. It means that everybody experiences the game with the options they need, and they can all enjoy it to the same degree.
Yeah, definitely. I think we read a lot of guidelines, obviously, a lot of best practices. We talked to consultants, but really nothing has been as helpful as actually getting someone from the community in the studio with a controller in their hands and giving us their direct feedback.
Right, yeah. And Cameron, as a gamer with hearing loss, you participated in one of these feedback sessions all the way back in 2019. So what was that experience like, and how did it develop into fully consulting on the development of sign language for Forza Horizon 5?
So the experience back in 2019 was really exciting because it wasn't kind of just me. There were lots of other people there as well who had kind of different accessibility needs. Someone who was neurodiverse, people with different sensory needs, with different physical access needs, all sort of feeding back to sort of teams of developers on their own very personal, lived-in experiences of how they access games and what makes life easier or more challenging for them. And then it was sort of through those sessions, speaking to developers, where sort of initially a lot of the conversation had focused on subtitles and captions and how can you improve that? And I think there's still a lot of work to be done there in general. But it was sort of from there that the conversation came up of me kind of explaining that for many people for whom sign language is their first language, that means that English is their second or even third language. And so if you're constantly kind of accessing anything, be it like a game or a TV series or a film, if you're accessing it in your second or third language, it's a tiring experience. You may not get all of the beats that are being communicated to you. You don't get that same nuance as you do listening to a conversation, right? If you read a transcript of a conversation and you listen to a conversation, it's two wildly different experiences. And actually a way around this where you can articulate those story beats and get people on board and understanding and enthralled by what you're doing is by using their native language. And I suppose it's kind of in that way that I kind of see the ASL and the BSL being included obviously as accessibility, but also a kind of sense of localization because it's a language option, alongside French and German and what have you.
Fair. And I mean, adding sign language is not a simple process either. There's a lot of factors that go into adding any language voiceover to the game, right? You got like, acting, timing, like cadence, interpretation, tone. So much goes into that. And with sign language, that's particularly true. So what's the process like there? And why is it so important to get that right?
You really hit the nail on the head in that it is just like any other kind of localization where you're fundamentally working with content you yourself don't understand. So from the beginning, it was really important for us that we had actors who were from the hard of hearing or deaf community. We worked with the Deaf Talent Collective here in the UK to help us find our actors, Louise and Chris. And from there, we got them on camera. They worked with an interpretation team to make sure that they're reading a script, but they're also understanding tone and nuance, irony and sarcasm, and that's coming through in their performance. From there, we took the videos and put them in game, and that's when the feedback loop really started. We started sending videos off to our consultants, to subject matter experts, and having these conversations on the dev team of how can we make this better, what isn't quite hitting, and what's doing well. And I think the very last step of that was pulling in Cameron to get feedback from someone not just as a member of the community, but also as a gamer, and to get both sides of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you say, adding sarcasm in sign language, that's not something I think you'd think about unless you were already involved heavily in the community and you knew the impact that would have and how necessary that actually is. So Cameron, how did it feel getting that email telling you that your suggestions, your ideas had been actually implemented in Forza Horizon 5?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty wild and very exciting. Sort of when I came along to the accessibility sprint, it wasn't something I thought would happen. It was very much a conversation of like, money was no object. You had a magic wand, like what would you do? And, it was like, well, sign language, put that into your game. With no kind of real expectation that it would, lead kind of anywhere. And then to kind of get that email a couple of years later and kind of being like, hey, like, we've actually gone ahead and done this. And we've put all these other bits in with it. Do you want to come in and see it? I was like, that's actually amazing. That's incredible. Yes. And like, just glad it didn't go into my spam folder. So it's fun to be here.
I'll bet. So, Madeleine, like practically speaking, in the game, how can people with hearing loss enable ASL and BSL, and how does that work?
So for all of our accessibility options, we wanted it to be as easy as possible to find them. So before you ever get behind the steering wheel of a car, in the title menu, you'll be able to see accessibility settings. You can go in there and select between ASL and BSL, American and British Sign Language. Additionally, you can also choose different backgrounds, different colored backgrounds to make it more visible. You can choose what location on the screen it will be in for whatever works best for you. And from there on out, in any cinematic, you'll be able to see a picture-in-picture window on the screen that has sign language interpretation. So it's in all of our cinematics, about 150, I want to say. And that's because that's where most of our narrative content is, so it'll allow players to get a better grip on the actual storytelling in Forza.
Yeah, and as I said, tone, intent, all of that is super important. And players who might not have been able to follow the narrative of Forza Horizon 5 before will definitely be able to now. And that's amazing to be able to understand the characters and the story all around them.
Right. I think subtitles have all the same challenges written language always has, which is things like emotional content and sarcasm and irony all get lost. And so it's really exciting to have sign language to fill that gap.
I mean, absolutely. So could you share the importance of games like Forza Horizon 5 adding options like ASL and BSL and like what new opportunities they add for people with hearing loss? And maybe Cameron has a sort of input on this one.
Forza isn't like an indie development. It's quite a big game from quite a big studio. And I think what it does is it very much kind of sets a precedent of kind of what can be done and what other studios could start to sort of look at exploring as well. I think it's such like an important first step and also such a nuanced first step. There's lots to learn. There's lots of new ground to explore and things to kind of work out and figure out. And so I think it's a really nice kind of stepping stone in that direction, certainly for the first time in like a AAA game of including sign language options for deaf and hard of hearing gamers, which is just cool.
Absolutely. You're paving the way as well, setting the example. And that's so important. That's how to make a difference. So Madeleine, does this tie into the other accessibility features in Forza Horizon 5?
Yes, definitely. So, of course, we have high contrast settings and different subtitle options. I think it ties in best with keyword highlighting, which is a feature that Cameron actually also recommended we implement, which is where the actual keywords and the important information in the subtitles are highlighted. And that will help hard of hearing users who maybe are still relying on subtitles to go back and forth between the subtitles easily while also interpreting the actual sign language picture in picture.
So Madeleine brought up a great point there about keyword highlighting, Cameron. So how does that fit in with sign language, and what is that exactly?
Really good question. So this was based on my experiences. So I'm a teacher of the deaf. So by day, I teach deaf and hard of hearing children. And oftentimes when I'm doing my lessons, if I have a young person who only uses sign language and maybe the lesson that I'm going through is maybe quite text heavy, what I'll do is I'll highlight particular words within a sentence on my presentation so that when you read them, you're not focused on the connectives and the sort of the little bits in the sentence, you're focused more on the key bits of information. And I found doing that with my students that the way in which it's highlighted in some ways links up with the kind of the grammatical structure of BSL, because in BSL there aren't really connectives. And so just by putting a sentence together, like if I was to say to you like, Earth is the third planet in the solar system and it orbits the sun, for my students who only use BSL, a way to read that information might just be Earth, third planet, solar system, orbit, sun. And so you're removing all of the unnecessary language, so you're making it easier to pick up and understand the core concept of what you're trying to teach. And so in the accessibility sprint, one of the things I was feeding back was my experiences with my students and what I find works for them, for those students who are BSL first language users. And I was saying how, it might be useful if there was a subtitle option where actually these key bits of information are highlighted. So, if you are having to rely just on subtitles, then you can still very quickly at a glance pick out the key bits of information of what you need to do, where do you need to go, who do you need to find. And then if you're mixing that with, your hearing and you're also having to read the subtitles, then you're able to kind of get a more complete picture and sort of very easily at a glance work out what it is you've got to do.
So before we wrap this up, have we got any final thoughts we'd like to share? Madeleine, if we start with you.
I think I just want to say that we're still committed to growing our accessibility features, to pushing forward and making our game as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So we did something new, we tried something for the first time, and we can't wait to get all of the feedback from our players and learn new lessons from that. Also, I hope this encourages other studios to follow in our footsteps and start implementing sign language as a core feature for their games as well.
Absolutely. And how about yourself, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing that, really, I think it's important that my fellow deaf and hard of hearing gamers try this out, get stuck in, try this feature, find out what works, and comes forward with what they love, what they think needs improving. Because like any feature, it's like a process of iteration, and it's only ever going to get better the more it's used and the more people feedback and give their honest opinions. And I hope too, sort of going from this, other studios start to look at what they're doing with accessibility and thinking about what they can do to support not just American Sign Language and British Sign Language, but lots of the other sign languages around the world into their games, so that more and more deaf and hard of hearing gamers can enjoy those titles and have that same rich experience of gameplay and storytelling as their hearing peers would.
Great. Thank you both very much for that. And Madeleine and Cameron, this has been a truly insightful conversation. And on behalf of the Forza community, thank you for your work in bringing ASL and BSL to life in Forza Horizon 5, as well as everything you do to make gaming more accessible for everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.